So what is our motivation at all for doing purging? Well, the major features, some of which are more important and some less important, are disk space. Nowadays, I have to qualify that as being relatively minor because most servers have multiple tens of gigabytes, and your PBS system is probably 1/10 of that space. So although disk space can potentially be something of an issue, it's usually way down on the list. This may not be as minimal as I'm making out, because as we move forward more and more into the virtual server environment, we are more easily able to have a system administrator say, oh, the accounting system, I'm going to give it 50 gigabytes. In the past, what would happen is you would order a server that had 200 gigabytes, and that was it. If the accounting system took 10, you had this lonely little accounting system taking up 1/20 of the whole amount of space, and so you had this huge amount of space, and that's all there was to it. Now with the virtual systems where we're putting in a VM machine or a Hyper-V machine and running 2 or 3 servers, on top of that, the administrator may say, oh, accounting system, we're giving you 50 gigabytes. So this issue of space may become actually, and maybe ironically with the further advance in hardware and technology, it may become more of an issue as we pare down the amount of space that our servers are taking. Another important issue is report printing time. Although we, in the past and actually as an ongoing project, are pretty constantly revising the system to make it more efficient, especially with respect to reporting, there are certain cases where there really is nothing that the system can do but start at the beginning of the file and read through to the end of the file, just looking for the records that match the specifications you give it. So that, for example, if there isn't a key by, let's say, salesman number, and you're doing a scan of sales of your customer history file, and you say, I want to do first to last for all customers, first to last for all dates, and I'm looking for salesman 45. Well, unless that file happens to be specifically having a key that's by salesman, then the only thing the program can do is start at the beginning of the file, looking at each and every record for a 45 in the salesman number, and then passing that record back to the program and saying, here's another record, here's another record. Well, if you have 500,000 records and there are only 10,000 transactions for that salesman, then what that means is you're going to be reading 100% of the file for 2% of the records. And that is simply going to take a lot of time, or it's a significant amount of time. Again, we're talking relative terms. Maybe it's a minute to do it, maybe it's 30 seconds, maybe it's 5 minutes, depending on hardware and file sizes and so on. But the fact of the matter is, when we're doing this kind of printing, when we're having to print, go through our history files, whether it's a vendor history or an inventory history or a customer history and invoice history, we very frequently have 200,000, 500,000, occasionally even 1 million records. In those cases, when we have to pass the whole file, it's going to take a lot longer than if we've been able to cut that file down. So there's a very big advantage in being able to purge. Again, the context, which I will be harping on time and time again, is it's business dependent, and so you make your decision based on business rules, but know full well that if you feel you have to keep 500,000 records, there will be a penalty there, in that if you could get rid of twice that much and bring it down to, let's say, 200,000 records, the report might run twice as fast. On the other hand, if the report takes 2 minutes and taking it down to a minute doesn't matter to anybody, then that's fine too. In the current environment, with PBS being upgraded, we've made a tremendous number of changes to PBS. In the past few years, we've introduced numerous business features, and besides SQL, and a number of other things that have involved file changes. What that then means is, in order to convert from, let's say, 11.8 or 11.7 up to 12.0 and to 12.1 and to 12.2 and so on, you are having to make file conversions. That means reading files, and the bigger the files, the longer the conversions. Now, this is kind of lower on the scale, and typically it may be something that you don't even care about because it's the partner who's got to take care of it, and he's got to do the conversion, and he's the one who's got to watch the record counter trip over as it moves up to 500,000 records. On the other hand, he may well be charging you by the hour, so he may be charging you by the hour to watch this trip go up to $500,000. So the conversion time, although it may be once or twice a year, there are issues involved, so that if a conversion takes 3 hours because of a lack of purging as opposed to 1 hour, it can involve some dollars and cents. And the final issue has cropped up since we introduced SQL. We found that although SQL is absolutely brilliant and lightning fast with certain kinds of operations, random operations, it's not so fast with sequential operations. And so this is really a subcategory of item number 2, reporting time. If we give SQL 500,000 records and tell it to run from beginning to end, looking for salesman number 45 again, we will experience some delays. We will experience some longer times than if we have the 200,000. That's just kind of straight logic. But it's because this is an issue with SQL, then we can say that it becomes even more of an issue for you to at least think about what are the limits for purging. What can you do with purging? What are the downsides? Well, obviously we're getting rid of data. We're getting rid of data in the same sense that we're taking the file folders, our accounts payable file folders from last year, and moving them into bankers' boxes or moving them downstairs. Now, presumably at some point, whether or not you do this for 3 years or 4 years, the 5th year you're going to be calling some sort of a company to come and shred all the documents. This is really what we're talking about, and this is kind of where the rubber hits the road. This purging amounts to getting rid of the data, and we need to know whether or not we have to have our bankers boxes for 4 years or 7 years or whatever. Because at the end of the day, when we do a purge, we do get rid of information. And so the downsides are we simply can't find a vendor that we did business with 10 years ago, or we can't find an invoice from 12 years ago, that sort of thing. In certain cases that we'll talk about in accounts payable, it can actually have more immediate effects. For example, if we purge our AP open item too aggressively, we may not be able to use the simple method of voiding a check, because if we had a fully paid voucher and we purged it out of the open item file, it's the open item file that keeps the data that allows us to reinstate the open status of the voucher. In other words, to void the check, remove the check, and make this an open item. Now, there are ways around it. They're documented in the AP manual. Basically, it's a matter of using a non-AP check. So none of this is really a disaster, but I'm using this to point out that this is one of those consequences where we do want to talk about what are the time limits for voiding a check, for voiding a check and therefore purging an open item file. So that's really the preamble to the basic issue here, which is how often, when do we do it, and the principles on which we decide that.